United States, this is very much a housekeeping issue. They have large stockpiles that, because they are there, they have to continue using them. It's a financial issue.
There's a lot of money involved, there's a lot of politics, and for that reason I think it's sometimes difficult for the US to do the right thing.
The stockpile that the US has in terms of submunitions is just mind-boggling. And one would hope that the US starts to destroy this stockpile. There's a recognition that they're not terribly useful weapons anymore in many of the situations that face the US military, and they're just unreliable.
I think it's going to be very difficult for the US to keep using cluster munitions in the future. Virtually all its allies are currently on board the Oslo process on cluster munitions.
While the US is historically the largest user of cluster munitions, it's also the country that is the largest worldwide donor and destroyer of cluster munitions. We build them, we sell them or transfer them, somebody uses them, if not us, and then we go and clean it up. So it's this kind of very vicious cycle that goes on.
I think cluster bombs are also a threat to our national security. When I visited Lebanon this past summer, I went to South Lebanon, an area that was devastated by cluster bombs dropped by Israel, many of which were made in the United States. And again, cluster bombs that are dropped on a population that continue to maim and kill people do not generate goodwill toward the United States. It creates an environment where people are very susceptible to taking that anger that they feel, which is understandable, and using it against the US. In a sense, it's a weapon because of its indiscriminate nature that creates an atmosphere in which more terrorists can be born.
We are, I think, a humanitarian population that, as are people everywhere. We care about people, and in particular we care about children, and we care about justice. And the idea that, that our government, our military is using a weapon in our name that is actually killing children and not combatants, people are going to be enraged.
As one of our UN colleagues said recently, cluster munitions are very effective if you want to kill civilians, and that is what it's doing.
Initially, I really am surprised that the average American doesn't know more about the issue of cluster bombs and submunitions, just because so many are used these days and so many civilians are killed by them. I mean, other than bullets on the ground, the use of submunitions is probably the #1 killer of civilians in conflicts right now.
I can't tell you about a war where cluster bombs have been used, quote, responsibly. It just doesn't happen. It's impossible for it to happen.
For investors, cluster munitions means big business. For the cluster munition survivors, cluster munitions mean death, injuries, suffering, devastation. And that is the reality.
We need to take these weapons off the shelves because, of course, military commanders are going to use what's available. If all they're given is cluster munitions, they're going to use cluster munitions. What we need to do is give them something else, an alternative that is more effective, that is more precise.
There are hundreds of millions, perhaps billions of these things stockpiled. That is the most unimaginable humanitarian crisis in waiting, and we have to do something now to stop that.
If the US, if they don't want to be involved in the process, but if they could at least commit to not transfer and sell on their old stockpiles of cluster munitions, it would be a huge step forward and something very meaningful, which would have a great effect on the ground. And we are not hearing those commitments from the United States. If they are concerned by the humanitarian impact, that commitment should be possible to make.
Eventually, it's up to the people. It's in their hands. I mean, if we get rid of cluster munitions, it's going to be thanks to the people who move, the people in government, the people in the NGOs, the people in the media, the people, basically, the citizens, people like you and me who decide to do something against this weapon.
The US has a stockpile of maybe 1 billion submunitions. Of that billion submunitions, only 30,000 are centrifuge weapons. And so if we're able to ban all of the submunitions except that 30,000, then we've done a pretty good job. And then we only have that little bit to go in the future.
This is an issue, I think, that is discrete, it is winnable. You know, we've got to make enough people aware that this is happening and that there's something that can be done about it that is relatively simple.
There needs to be a proper change in thinking within the Pentagon. There needs to be an acceptance that you can't fight today's battles with yesterday's weapons.